Course 2030W. What's new with Avaya Workforce Optimization 15.1? This course is designed to help participants to recognize the new features and architecture in version 15.1, classify site preparation and customer responsibilities, look at configurations such as SQL Server, describe the version 15.1 unification of applications through the new user interface, review the installation and configuration. Module 1. Overview of WFO 15.1. Our module objectives are to cover a quick overview of the major changes of the WFO solution at release 15.1, a look at the changes with the Avaya contact recorder, and to look at the installation and configuration of ACR 15.1. Lesson 1. Timelines and brief overview. In this lesson, we review the dates around GA release of the WFO 15.1 software, and briefly look at the solution as a whole. At the time of this recording, Avaya WFO release 15.1 is under control GA. WFO 15.1 is scheduled to go fully GA on April 11, 2016. It's important to note that until this date, only greenfield deployments with the Linux ACR recording from Avaya Communication Manager is supported. WFO 15.1 has a completely refreshed web interface, including a top-level navigation bar which stays visible while different applications are configured. The interface, although different from version 12, has been designed to be simple to use and more intuitive. There is a reduction in the number of separate application windows that are launched when navigating within the WFO user interface, improving the speed at which applications can be configured. In addition to this, with the use of JavaScript and HTML5, the overall load time of the user interface has improved. A new unified player ensures that various applications, such as quality monitoring and speech analytics, which require the replay function, do not require separate player applications loaded on the client PC. Architecture overview. Main architectural changes. WFO Release 15 creates separate databases on the SQL Server for speech analytics, biometrics, interaction analytics, and desktop and process analytics. On smaller consolidated deployments, it is no longer a requirement for the Windows Server to be part of a Windows domain. It is also not necessary to use the same account for WFO services as well as database access. Servers part of the enterprise deployment now communicate over a single common logical port. And finally, the Cognos and Business Objects reporting engines have been replaced by a single SQL reporting service. The server validation tool has been updated to check readiness of new components and users such as SSRS and the optional DMSA account. It also checks for free disk space in line with the customer-furnished equipment specs. There is also a new tool for ensuring the correct permissions are set on the database. Memory requirements were increased for most new servers to accommodate new features and additional buffer for future growth on the database. Pop-up notifications are no longer dependent on a SIP-reliant client-server architecture. Instead, the function has been implemented as a feature called desktop messaging. Desktop process analytics has now been integrated into the main WFO installation and can be enabled as a server role. Speech analytics databases were introduced to hold transcripts instead of storing them as .dat files on the application servers. Also, the storage manager has been replaced by the central post-processing framework. Technical stack. ACR 15.1 requires Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6 or Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 Update 1. If installing on Windows, ACR requires Windows 2012 or Windows 2012 Release 2. The framework server now supports SQL Server 2014 in addition to SQL Server 2008 and 2012 and must be running on a Windows 2012 server. The installation has been updated to deploy JRE7 for ACR and JRE8 for WFO framework. WFO 15.1 implements WebLogic version 12c. As mentioned earlier, Cognos and Business Objects reporting services have been replaced by SQL Server reporting services. On the client side, desktop applications are supported with Citrix XenApp, VMware View, and XenDesktop. Supported versions of Windows are Windows 7, 8, and 8.1, and Internet Explorer's versions 9 to 11 running in native mode. Security. WFO 15.1 provides the optional ability to define a separate non-administrator Windows account used for database access. Referred to as the Database Management Service account, this is an administrator account for the SQL Server. This account is only required on data center deployments and not on site. With Release 15, a new System Rights Settings spreadsheet is also provided, which defines all required permissions to be set for the various system accounts. The Secured Web Gateway is a new application with WFO 15.1. It is an HTTP proxy server that provides a single point of access for all HTTP or HTTPS services and applications on the system servers. This Apache HTTP application is installed on all system servers. All HTTP or HTTPS communications to and from the data center only require a single port to be available on the servers. Port 80 in the case of HTTP and 443 in the case of HTTPS. The Secured Web Gateway is also responsible for managing security components such as tokens and session timeouts. This greatly simplifies firewall port preparation, single sign-on, and load balancer configurations. The Secure Gateway will inspect the request URL, specifically the service name or application name, and routes the traffic to local web services and applications. The key management system has been updated to version 3.2.1, and the default encryption algorithm is set to HMAC SHA-1. SSL certificates now support SHA-2. With the introduction of the Secure Web Gateway, handling of SSL requests have been offloaded from the backend web server components to the new Secure Web Gateway. Miscellaneous Improvements. All searches for recordings now include a near real-time search by default in the search results, and so there is no longer to select a separate checkbox to include recordings occurred within the last hour. You can now obtain up to 2,000 results in a single search, along with the ability to search by different media types. The search provides filtering capabilities with a calls number tag. The existing pop-up messaging mechanism has been replaced by the desktop messaging feature, which provides a scalable, real-time message delivery system. Desktop messaging enables an administrator, manager, supervisor, or scheduler to send desktop messages to employees by using their name, login, or role within their organization. The feature does not require the client machines to listen on specific ports, as communication is via HTTP. And as the mechanism does not use the SIP protocol, there's no requirement to configure DNS entries on the customer's network. The feature requires two components installed on the user's desktop, the Desktop Connection Manager and the Desktop Messaging Client. Desktop Process Analytics is now installed via the regular WFO installer. DPA uses core hierarchy and supports multi-tenancy, supports single sign-on, uses the suite's managed adapters for data integrations, can deliver foundation notification alerts in response to defined triggers. DPA data is now available in the Unified Player user interface and has support for intraday scorecard feeds. Post-processing framework is a new way to manage post-processing activities and queues. For speech applications, this framework replaces the function of the storage manager. With PPFW, all rules and their execution are kept in a single location in the data center. Centralization of this framework allows for clear statistics. The framework can generate reports on mission history and also provide detailed reports on failures. PPFW supports multimedia channels as well. Serviceability. With Release 15.1, the Alarm Management tool launches within the Enterprise Manager, making access to system alarms easier, as can be seen from this slide. Each component under Enterprise Manager runs its own Enterprise Manager adapter. This adapter is responsible to communicate alarms to Enterprise Manager. Alarms are collected by any service running Release 15.1. You can define thresholds in the system to handle a sudden burst of alarms. The acknowledgement of alarms is handled from a single screen, and to delete any acknowledged alarms, a database purge job runs every night. Customers running on WFO version 12 may upgrade to version 15.1 from the GA date. Operating system upgrades will be supported. There may be a requirement for database sizing changes due to the introduction of remote SQL servers for speech analytics and DPA customers. The customer is still responsible to install SSRS on all data center database or database management platforms. In this lesson, we looked at the dates surrounding WFO 15.1 and an overview of the new features of 15.1, such as the new interface, DPA, and secure gateway. Lesson 2, Overview of Avaya Contact Recording 15.1. In this lesson, we will look at the new features with Avaya Contact Recorder 15.1 and also review new features that have been backported to older releases of ACR. ACR 15.1 is built on ACR 12.1, and several of the features introduced at 15.1 have been backported to previous releases, with the latest patches applied. ACR must be updated to 15.1 in order to integrate with WFO 15.1. New features have been added to ACR, such as archiving enhancements and a new distributed replay server configuration. We will now look at some of the features backported to previous releases of ACR. ACR now supports multiple owners for calls. The change applies to the bulk recording mode and its individual targets only, not to on-demand or meeting recording. The advanced setting called owner has been extended to allow a semicolon list of more than one such owner. If the list of owners includes one or more devices on the call, for example adding HR and 1234 as owners for the station 1234, the latter is recognized as a device and has its owner flag set, rather than assuming that this being alphanumeric characters is a non-device owner. A new option is supported in order for administration to be made easier for outsources by allowing one or more additional owners to be specified in bulk recording mode, rather than replacing the default owner as is the normal behavior of this advanced setting. This option is set by adding the line owners.additive equals true into the acr.properties file. Recording of video streams that arrive via SIP invites is not supported. Any video streams arriving to the ACR via SIP will now be ignored and the audio stream will still be recorded. ACR now maintains a bad segment counter on each DMCC cell phone, incremented each time a no packets alarm is generated for the soft phone and zeroed when a segment is successfully recorded. Should the counter reach a defined threshold, which is by default set to 3, the DMCC cell phone will be automatically removed from the pool of available ports and an alarm raised. The threshold can be overridden by setting the property DMCC.resetThreshold. By doing this, the system will advise the user to reset the port via the port status page, at which point it will become available again. With the latest ACR release, ACR archiving now supports secure FTP, which is more appropriate for transferring sensitive audio recordings. We will now look at the features exclusive to ACR Release 15.1. As mentioned earlier, in order to integrate with WFO Framework 15.1, the Avaya Contact Recorder must also be at 15.1. ACR 15.1 will, similar to previous releases, allow the configuration of data sources via Enterprise Manager, upload of recordings to the WFO framework, replay of recordings, and live monitoring using the framework. cases, in cases where the customer may have migrated a large index of recordings, call searches could be slow. For such scenarios, the search layout can now be turbo-enabled. This requires more data space so that new indexes can be created, but improves the speed of your searches. If you would like the ACR login page to look similar to the WFO framework login page, you can now add a setting for the same in the ACR properties file as shown. With ACR 15.1, the Archive tab has been renamed to IO Jobs. IO Jobs lets you configure a range of fully automated input and output jobs that perform several roles, letting you archive, import, export, and share your recordings with others. The table shown describes these functions and can be found in the ACR 15.1 Administration Guide available on the Avaya support webpage. There are now several ways a third-party company can extract the call recordings from ACR. The recording extraction can be automated or run ad hoc. There is also now an option to set up a distributed replay server, which can be configured to receive and store a continuous feed of recordings from the ACR. Many owners of ACR systems are outsourcers, recording calls on behalf of multiple end customers for whom they handle calls. These customers may require a copy of and/or ongoing access to the recording of their calls. A distributed replay server would be helpful for such scenarios. The DRS feed configured on the IO Jobs tab of the main recording system feeds the DRS server with recordings. Note that the DRS is a separate licensed server. A distributed replay server is useful for customers wishing to manage retention and deletion of recordings automatically without having to design their own system. Provide quick, easy, powerful access to any subset of their recordings, regardless of selection criteria. Frequent access to recordings, especially by multiple people and/or processes. Need to control access to recordings so that users can only search for and replay the recordings that they are entitled to, and satisfy multiple overlapping demands for access to the recordings, that is, anywhere a single recording might be of interest to more than one party. A DRS is installed as another ACR. The licensed applied defines it as a distributed replay server. In order to deploy a DRS, you must install a copy of Avaya Contact Recorder, Release 15, enter a DRS license key. The outsourcer must configure a DRS export feed on their recording system that selects all or a specific subset of their recordings and copies them to a network accessible location. You must then configure your DRS import to look for incoming files in that same location. Your recordings are transferred automatically into your own DRS. Here is a screenshot of the licensing page for a server that has been licensed as a distributed replay server. This is the screenshot of the IO Jobs page of a DRS. Note the Add DRS Import button at the bottom. As mentioned earlier, the archive page has been renamed to IO Jobs. Functions you can perform from this page are add archive, add cam import, add export, add DRS feed, add DRS import for DRS servers. The destination types for IO Jobs have been rationalized to SMB, SFTP, or local destinations. EMC can only be used as a destination for archive and cam imports, and optical disks are only supported for archiving. In this screenshot, you can see that on editing an archive job, various options are available for file storage. On exporting or archiving recordings, a new CSV file is now generated and added to the export. This CSV provides useful information about the calls that have been exported, such as the specific tar file that contains a recording and which file it is within that tar file. On EMC, the CSV files related to the calls in a tar are added into that tar before it is sent to EMC. On DVD, the CSV files are built in the temp folder until the media fills or is manually ejected when they are written to the media. On SMB, local, SFTP archives, the CSV files are built in the temp folder until a tar is written and then appended to files in the root folder of the archive. On all exports, CSV files are appended 135 minutes after the corresponding WAV file is written. CSV file content for archives is stored to the database until it has been successfully written out. So an ACR restart not only rebuilds tars, but also writes CSV details for the whole tar and whole media. On controlled shutdown of the ACR, any cached entries should be flushed to an export location. In this lesson, you have learned the new features at release 15 that have been backported to version 11 and 12, and reviewed the new features of ACR 15.1. Lesson 3, ACR 15.1 Installation and Configuration. In this lesson, we look at some of the changes regarding the installation and configuration of ACR 15.1. These changes have been backported to be applicable to ACR 12.1 as well. Several of the third-party software compatible with ACR 15.1 has been backported to be compatible with ACR 12.1. These include Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 Update 1, Java Runtime Environment 1.8. Kickstart updates include the installation of either Red Hat 6 or 7, refactor to use HTTP servers instead of floppy disks, update of partitioning, allows customization of Kickstart scripts on the fly. This slide shows a screenshot of the new Kickstart utility that has been backported to ACR 12.1. It runs on Windows 7 or higher and listens on port 8080 for connections from the Linux ACR server. The script generated by the tool is displayed to the user so that any changes or corrections can be applied. Once edited, click on Run HTTP Server. This slide shows the process of using the Kickstart application to configure a new Linux server to be used for ACR. When the install completes, it will show a message on the HTTP server window and prompt for a reboot of the server. In this lesson, you have learnt about the changes to ACR installation, including newly supported operating systems and the Kickstart application. In this module, we looked at an overview of the new features of ACR 15.1 and the changes to its installation. Module 2, Workforce Optimization 15.1. Our module objectives are to cover the prerequisites to installing WFO framework at release 15.1, changes to the installation, and changes to the configuration of framework release 15.1. Lesson 1, WFO 15.1 System Prerequisites. Our lesson objectives are to learn the prerequisite software required to support the installation of WFO framework and look at the account configuration required to support framework 15.1. Product documentation has been updated for WFO 15.1. Take note that there is now a separate SQL Server installation and upgrade guide which provides information regarding the configuration of SQL Server reporting services. While Whilst the same Windows account can be used for all functions of WFO, for security purposes, customers are likely to prefer using separate accounts for the installation, for WFO management, database access, SQL Server services, and for maintenance. The management service account is used for running application services, accessing all folders and files created by applications using file security access, and running the SSRS reporting service. The DMSA is an optional new user account used for the following purposes: database installation and configuration, database upgrade, migration, and patch installation, managing and accessing SQL databases, and dedicated SQL Server maintenance users. The SQL Services account is used to run the SQL Server Database Engine services and the SQL Server Agent service. You can use a single domain account to run these SQL services or a unique account for each service. The maintenance account is a user account used for maintenance tasks such as running backups, installing hotfixes, troubleshooting. This account must have the following rights for each of these servers: local Windows administrator rights and SQL Server sysadmin rights. The Windows user rights assigned are detailed in the User Rights, Windows Services and Settings Guide. The new SQL Server Installation and Upgrade Guide contains a section describing the process required to install and configure SQL Server reporting services, which at release 15.1 replaces business objects and Cognos reporting engines. SSRS is an SQL Server component installed on the data center, on the server that will host the reporting services server role. In the case of a remote SQL, install SSRS on the database management server. In order to configure SSRS on the SQL server, the installer must connect to the report server, configure the service account, configure the web service URL, configure the report server database, test the report manager URL, configure SSRS email settings. A new database permissions tool is now available to assign the relevant service accounts MSA and DMSA with the required database permissions. You should run the database permissions configuration tool once for each SQL Server instance in the enterprise. Update the server name and port for each instance. The new server validator has been improved to check for hardware, free disk space in line with CFE specifications, permissions for service accounts, server readiness validations for SSRS, DMSA account, and the Windows Server. The screenshot shows a section of the Customer Furnished Equipment Guide detailing the specifications of the various hardware types that you can validate against using the SR validator. In this lesson, we have looked at the configuration of SSRS required for WFO 15.1 and the accounts required to support an instance of WFO 15.1, the requirement of the management service account and the optional database managed service account, the new tool available to set up database permissions required by WFO, and the updated server readiness valid. Lesson 2. Installation of WFO Release 15.1. In this lesson, we will have a closer look at the improved installer for WFO 15.1 and the updated server readiness tool. WFO WFO 15.1 provides a new installer on a single ISO image, and hence there is no requirement any longer to merge the contents of multiple disks. The overall installation size has been significantly reduced by removing the Cognos and Business Objects components. This slide shows the new databases, platforms, and server rules that have been introduced with WFO Release 15.1. In addition to the standard server readiness from WFO 12, the new 15.1 installer validates the operating system version, the SQL version, existence of SSRS, free space available, permissions for the MSA, DMSA, and IIS_I user accounts. Also, it checks for the port status required for WebLogic and IIS. The new validator also now checks for platform changes, IIS settings, SQL account permissions, special characters and passwords, and blocking uninstalls of systems with an HFR installed. In this lesson, we had a closer look at the new WFO installer and the improved server readiness. Lesson 3, Configuration of WFO Release 15.1. In this lesson, we look at changes in the configuration of WFO framework at Release 15.1, including the new user interface. Lesson 3, Configuration of WFO Release 15.1. In this lesson, we look at changes in the configuration of WFO framework at Release 15.1, including the new user interface, changes to application configuration on the server, as well as applications on the user desktop. WFO Release 15.1 presents a refreshed, modern user interface together with the new navigation scheme. The new top-level navigation is visible in all applications and replaces the navigation in previous versions of the suite. The navigation scheme dynamically reflects first and second level selections from the main menu. The workspace for all users throughout the suite has been enhanced to provide intuitive actions such as drag and drop to reposition interface elements, and the ability to resize screen widgets horizontally and vertically. In addition, you can save your workspace settings and revert your workspace to a previously saved state. WFO Release 15.1 introduces new server roles that can be configured if licensed. These include Biometrics Database, Biometrics Engine, Customer Feedback Survey, DPA Applications, DPA Database, Analytics Framework, Interaction Analytics Services, Reporting Services, Speech Analytics Database, and Speech Products Database. In this screenshot, you can see the various new roles, such as the Biometrics Database, that can be enabled along with the already existing roles. Here is a comparison of the new system management layout at Release 15.1 compared to Release 12 on the right with Enterprise Manager. This slide shows the integration server and access to data sources. You can still access certain screens from different locations. For example, you can reach Data Sources section from the Recording Management menu as well. This slide shows the Data Sources section accessed from Recording Management. Application Configuration. In order to use SSRS, the customer must have an SQL instance for SSRS configured for the database platform. The use of SSRS in the place of Cognos and Business Objects simplifies the overall reports installation, maintenance, and support, as there is only one reporting engine, as opposed to three separate reporting engines. All V12 canned reports will be available at Release 15.1 with updated styling. Items that cannot be migrated to Release 15.1 are ad hoc reports or custom reports, instances of reports, report schedules, and report role assignments within the assignment manager for quality monitoring. The quality monitoring reports can be found under the Framework Reports module as seen on this slide. This slide shows a portion of the new interface for quality monitoring. The new interface is cleaner, more usable. You can share info from multiple applications, and a flexible widget-based layout. QM and contacts are now unified, therefore it's simpler to understand and navigate. It's completely unified with the navigation of the other WFO applications. You have one unified dashboard, a unified browser for session management. Logging out will now log you off quality monitoring as well. Privileges are much simpler, streamlined, and more granular. WFO 15.1 has added privileges for screen and audio playback and real-time monitoring, monitoring by agent or by extension, rejecting interactions from a shared inbox, editing remarks, and the ability for employees to view scores. The agent application is now similar to how the other WFO applications are structured. Agents have more capabilities, such as using custom flags and folders to implement workflows involving agents. QM functionalities such as search, playback, download, send, etc. are now available to agents as well. There is only one player for all applications in WFO 15.1. This player shows the waveform, CTI tags and user annotations, speech categories, and application usage, all on one unified player. Although the forecasting and scheduling thick client runs in the background on the server, end users must always use the web client for forecasting and scheduling. With Release 15.1, all forecasting and scheduling must be done through the web interface, and therefore all key F&S functionality has been migrated to the web user interface. Scorecards have a new user interface for managers and employees supporting advanced visualization, data exploration, and analysis of employee and organization performance. The administration of KPIs and scorecards has not changed. The smiley faces we're used to have been replaced by color code widgets instead. Scorecards display KPI value, trends, and goals. Filters can be used to customize the view. You can also drill down to individual KPIs. These are some of the new adapters for scorecards available at WFO 15.1. Source metadata and measures import SQL. This is a generic SQL source measure import adapter that allows access to source measure data and metadata via an SQL database connection. Speech source metadata and measures import SQL. This is a new speech adapter that directly accesses the QM or speech database to retrieve categorization results via SQL's queries. And finally, DPA source metadata and measures import SQL. This is a new DPA adapter that directly accesses the DPA database to retrieve DPA results via SQL queries. Desktop application installation. Desktop messaging at Release 15.1 uses a single client-side service which communicates over a single port for messaging. It only uses outbound HTTP requests, and therefore there are no listening ports on the desktop. It no longer uses SIP, and therefore no DNS configuration is required. Desktop messaging is comprised of two components installed on the user desktop: the Desktop Connection Manager and the Desktop Messaging Client. The Connection Manager stores connection details of the server hosting the Framework Application Server role or the application load balancer. Here we see screenshots of the new desktop messaging application with no messages, when an agent receives a notification, and finally, the details of that notification on the agent PC. In order to install desktop messaging, you would need to 1. Meet all customer site preparation requirements for desktop messaging. 2. Install desktop resources. Desktop resources is a prerequisite package that includes mandatory resources required by almost all desktop applications. And 3. Install Desktop Connection Manager. To do this, from the desktop media, run desktop connection manager.msi, enter the server name of the server hosting the Framework Application Server role, indicate whether you want to use HTTP or HTTPS. You can also select to use fully qualified username to send messages using their short name. The Desktop Connection Manager will automatically run at startup. Install desktop messaging. From the media, run dms client install.msi. There's no configuration required except for destination folder location for install. To run desktop messaging, log off and log in again to activate the client, or run variant.dms.desktopmessagingclient.exe manually from the destination folder. Configure your desktop messages from the Framework portal. In this lesson, we looked at a new interface with WFO 15.1 and use it to configure the enterprise and applications within it. We also looked at application configuration required on the desktop PC. In the second module, we had a look at the prerequisite software configuration required for WFO 15.1 installation, the changes to the installation procedure, and finally, configuring WFO 15.1 via the new. In this course, we recognized the new features and architecture in version 15.1. We classified site preparation and customer responsibilities, reviewed the new features of ACR 15.1, reviewed SSRS and enterprise configuration at 15.1, and described the version 15.1 unification and combination of applications through the interaction's new user interface.